The form asked for a survival incident count. Medical Officer Thessaly Vorn had filled out fitness certification forms for 300 soldiers across 11 years of field service. The survival incident field was standard: a box, a number, a checkbox confirming the patient had been evaluated for cumulative trauma response. Most soldiers had between 2 and 5. Decorated veterans sometimes reached 12. The Conclave field record, held by a Thessaly heavy infantry commander who had survived a siege on Rennes Station, was 19. Thessaly looked at the number on Corporal Elena Vasquez's file. 43. She had started counting at the beginning, methodically, professionally, the way a good medical officer documented everything: incident type, severity classification, projected survival probability at time of injury, actual outcome. She had stopped updating the count at 40, not because the incident stopped, because somewhere around the 37th entry, she had realized that the number had become medically meaningless, that she was counting the way you count waves on an ocean, not because the total matters, but because you cannot stop watching and you need to do something with your hands. She looked up from the file. Elena Vasquez sat across from her on the medical examination table, boots on the floor, hands loose in her lap, a fresh scar running from her left temple to her jaw that had not been there 8 days ago. She looked rested. She looked present. She looked, in every measurable clinical sense, completely fine. She was 29 years old. Same question as last time? Elena asked. Same question as last time, Thessaly confirmed. And same answer. I'd like to hear it again. Elena looked at her steadily. Not impatient. Not practiced. Just direct. I don't know why I keep surviving, she said. I just do. Thessaly looked at the file. At 43 entries. At 11 years of her own handwriting describing things that should not have outcomes. That, she said quietly, is what concerns me. Concern was a mild word for it. Thessaly had used it deliberately. She was a medical officer. She dealt in precise language, severity classifications, probability assessments, documented outcomes. She did not use words like impossible or inexplicable in official reports because those words had no clinical application and made review boards uncomfortable. But she kept a personal file, separate from the official record. 11 years of notes written in the quiet hours after shift, when the examination bay was empty, and the numbers on Elena Vasquez's chart refused to arrange themselves into anything she had been trained to understand. She opened it now. Incident 4, she said. Relian Ridge. Shrapnel laceration, left thoracic cavity. Projected survival, without immediate surgical intervention, 14%. Time to intervention, 41 minutes. Outcome. Full recovery, no lasting organ compromise. Elena nodded slowly. She remembered all of them. Thessaly had established that early. Incident 11. Atmospheric exposure, upper orbit, suit breach. Projected survival, 6%. Actual unconsciousness duration, 9 minutes. Outcome, mild frostbite, resolved within 72 hours. Incident 19. Thessaly impact round, direct contact, left shoulder. Thessaly paused on this one. She always paused on this one. Projected survival, 3%. The round did not exit the body. It stopped. Elena said nothing. Your tissue density shows no anomalous readings, Thessaly said. Your bone composition is within standard human parameters. Your pain response tests consistently normal. Every specialist I've consulted has reviewed your file and reached the same conclusion, which is that there is no biological explanation, Thessaly said, for any of it. Elena looked at her hands, turned them over once, put them back in her lap. What's the non-biological explanation? She asked. Thessaly was quiet for a moment. Incident 26, she said instead. Tell me what you remember about Incident 26. Something shifted in Elena's expression. Just slightly. The first shift Thessaly had seen in this entire conversation. Why that one specifically? Elena asked. Because, Thessaly said, that's the one where it wasn't just you. Elena was quiet for exactly long enough that Thessaly knew the answer mattered. Keller's Pass, Elena said finally. Sector collapse. We had 4 wounded who couldn't move on their own. 3, Thessaly said. Private Den. Corporal match. Specialist row. 3, Elena confirmed. You carried all of them. Yes. Thessaly opened the personal file to Incident 26. She had read it so many times the words had stopped looking like words and started looking like a problem she kept failing to solve. At the time of extraction, she said, you had a fractured pelvis, 2 broken ribs, a dislocated left shoulder, and a concussion severe enough that our scanners later showed you should have lost consciousness within 4 minutes of sustaining it. Elena said nothing. The extraction took 19 minutes, Thessaly said. You made 4 separate trips into a collapsing structure. You carried a combined weight of approximately 340 kilograms across rough terrain. She looked up, with a fractured pelvis. They were alive, Elena said simply. That is not a medical explanation. No, Elena agreed. It's not. Thessaly sat back. This was the part of the conversation she had rehearsed most carefully because it was the part where the clinical language stopped cooperating. I've consulted with 3 human neurologists, she said. They described something called a threat response override, a neurochemical cascade that activates under specific conditions, not self-preservation conditions. They were very specific about that distinction. What conditions? Elena asked. When someone else is going to die, Thessaly said, if you don't act. The examination room was very quiet. They called it, Thessaly continued, the most poorly designed survival mechanism in known biology because it works in direct opposition to survival. She paused. And yet, Elena echoed softly. Incident 31, Thessaly said. That one wasn't about carrying anyone. She watched Elena's expression carefully. That one, she said, you were completely alone. Incident 31 had no witnesses. That was what made it different from most of the others. Most of Elena's survival incidents had at least one person present to file a secondary account, a squad mate, a rescue team, a pilot who had radioed in what they were seeing because they needed someone else to confirm it was real. Incident 31 had only Elena's own debrief, filed 3 days after. Calm handwriting, standard format, no embellishment, and the medical scans Thessaly had taken when Elena finally reached the nearest field station. Talvin Ridge, Thessaly said, Scout deployment. Your unit was recalled early due to the atmospheric event. You missed the extraction window. By 4 minutes, Elena said, you were alone on that ridge for 61 hours. Thessaly found the scan results without looking. She had memorized the page. Ambient temperature, minus 31 degrees. You had 1 emergency ration pack, a damaged heating unit, and a leg wound that had opened the femoral artery. Elena nodded. You cauterized it yourself, Thessaly said. Then you built a functional shelter from 3 damaged equipment cases and a thermal sheet. Then you climbed 400 meters of exposed ridge to reach the secondary beacon point because the primary had failed. The signal had to be above the interference line, Elena said, with a self-cauterized femoral wound. It held. Thessaly looked at her. I have reviewed your debrief 3 times. It contains no explanation for how you maintained function at that injury level in those temperatures for that duration. She paused. So, I want to ask you something I have never asked a patient in 11 years of practice. Elena waited. In your debrief, Thessaly said, you noted that at hour 40 you considered stopping. Yes, but you didn't. No. Why? Elena looked at the wall behind Thessaly for a moment. The particular look of someone retrieving something real. I started thinking about my sister, she said. She's 8. Thessaly set down her notes. She wasn't there, she said carefully. No, she was completely safe. Thousands of light years away. Yes. And that, Thessaly said slowly, was enough. Elena looked back at her. It's always enough, she said. Thessaly was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Elena tilted her head slightly. What are you writing? Elena asked. I'm not writing anything, Thessaly said. Then what are you doing? Reconsidering, said Thessaly. Everything I thought I knew about survival biology. Thessaly had not intended to build a case. It had started as professional curiosity, a single flag on a single file that she couldn't close because the numbers kept refusing to resolve. She had pulled Elena's records purely to understand them, the way you pull at a loose thread not to unravel anything, but simply because leaving it loose felt wrong. That was 3 years ago. The file on her personal terminal now contained material from 47 human soldiers across 9 field postings. Different units, different specialties, different injury profiles and different survival incidents and different debriefs filed in different handwriting by people who had never met each other and would likely never meet. The same pattern. Every time. Not identical survival rates. Humans died. She knew that she had filed those reports too, and they were the ones that stayed with her longest. But the ones who survived the unsurvivable always had the same answer when she asked the question. Not I refused to die. Not I fought through it. Always a name. Always someone specific. Always someone who was not present and did not need saving and would never know that they had been, in some biological and profound sense, the reason their person came home. A sister who was 8 years old. A parent. A friend. A child. A person back home who was safe and unaware and had become, without their knowledge, a mechanism of survival that no medical textbook in the Conclave had ever documented. Thessaly had named it in her personal notes. Not in the official file, not yet. She wasn't ready to defend it to a review board. She had called it the anchor mechanism, the thing that kept humans tethered to living when every biological signal said, let go. She looked at Elena now. I stopped updating your count at Incident 40, she said. I know, Elena said quietly. Do you know why? A pause. I think so, Elena said. Thessaly folded her hands on the desk. Incident 40 wasn't your incident, she said. It was mine. There had been an ambush at Valori Station. Thessaly did not typically find herself in ambushes. She was a medical officer. She worked in field stations and examination bays and the controlled, manageable chaos of surgical triage. She was not a soldier. She had never claimed to be one and had never wanted to be one and had spent 11 years doing her job precisely so that other people could do theirs. But Valori Station had not consulted her preferences. She had been in the wrong corridor at the wrong moment when the eastern wing collapsed. A support beam had come down across her legs. The damage was significant. She had assessed it herself with the detached efficiency of someone who has spent a career diagnosing injuries and did not enjoy applying that skill to their own body. She had concluded, professionally and accurately, that she had perhaps 40 minutes. Elena had found her at minute 8. Not her unit. They had been evacuating the northern wing. Elena had been alone, separated in the collapse, moving through rubble in the dark with a head wound that Thessaly would later document as her 39th incident. She had found Thessaly under the beam, and she had sat down. That was the part Thessaly still turned over. After everything, the beam removal, the field dressing, the 40-minute carry through unstable debris to the extraction point, the part she kept returning to was the sitting down. Elena had assessed the situation, made her calculations, and then simply sat beside Thessaly on the rubble and said, "You're going to be fine." Not as comfort. Thessaly had received comfort from medics before, the careful, kind language of someone managing a patient's final minutes with dignity. This was not that. This was a statement of fact from someone who had already decided what the outcome was going to be and was waiting for reality to catch up. I've been a medical officer for 11 years, Thessaly said quietly. I have documented survival phenomena across 47 human subjects. I have consulted specialists on 4 planets. She paused, and nothing in 11 years prepared me for what it felt like to be on the other side of it. Elena watched her steadily. What did it feel like? She asked. Like the possibility of dying became. Thessaly searched for the word. Administrative, she said finally, a technicality, something that was theoretically on the table, but that you had already decided wasn't relevant. It wasn't relevant, Elena said simply. I know, Thessaly said. I know that now. She looked at the file. At 43 entries and 11 years of careful, precise, insufficient documentation. That's why I stopped counting. The room was quiet. You didn't stop because the number became meaningless, Elena said softly. It wasn't a question. No, Thessaly admitted. I stopped because I finally understood what I'd been counting. She straightened, which is why I need to ask you something. Something that has nothing to do with your fitness certification. Elena waited. In 6 days, Thessaly said, I'm presenting my findings to the Conclave Medical Review Board. 11 years of data, 47 subjects, everything I've documented about the anchor mechanism. She looked directly at Elena, and they're going to ask me a question I cannot answer from the data alone. What question? Elena asked. They're going to ask, Thessaly said, whether it can be taught. Elena was quiet for a long time, not the careful quiet of someone constructing an answer. The deeper quiet of someone who had never been asked the question before and was discovering in real time that they already knew the answer. No, she said finally. Thessaly had expected this. She had prepared 3 follow-up questions for this exact answer, designed to probe the edges of it, to find the clinical language that would satisfy a review board that dealt in mechanisms and protocols and things that could be replicated in controlled conditions. But Elena said, Thessaly waited. It doesn't need to be taught. Elena looked at her hands. You already have one. The room was very still. Thessaly, she said, quietly, using her name, not her title. Who did you think about? At Velori Station. When I told you that you were going to be fine, and you decided to believe me. She looked up. Who did you think about? Thessaly opened her mouth, closed it. In 11 years of documentation across 47 subjects and hundreds of debriefs and 1 personal survival incident, she had filed with the careful detachment of someone who understood that distance was the only way she could write it accurately. She had never once asked herself that question. The answer arrived without permission. Her daughter, 7 years old, home on Vether Prime, safe and unaware, and waiting for her mother to come back from the posting that was supposed to last another 4 months. You didn't give me the mechanism, Thessaly said slowly, the words rearranging something fundamental as she spoke them. You just reminded me I already had it. You always had it, Elena said. Every species does. She paused, you never needed to use it the same way. You never had to. Because you were there, Thessaly said. Because we were there, Elena corrected gently. Thessaly looked at the fitness certification form, at the survival incident field still reading 43, at 11 years of documentation that had begun as a medical puzzle and ended as something she didn't have a clinical classification for and had stopped trying to find one. She picked up her pen. In the notes field, where she typically wrote cleared for active duty, no lasting trauma indicators, she wrote something she had never written in 11 years of practice. She wrote, Subject does not survive despite her injuries. Subject survives because of what she carries. Recommend all Conclave medical officers document not only what their human patients survive, but who they survive for. The anchor is the data. The anchor was always the data. She signed it, slid it across the desk. Elena looked at the notes field. Read it once. Looked up. Is that going in the official record? She asked. All of it, Thessaly said. Elena nodded slowly. Then, for the first time in the entire conversation, she smiled. Small, genuine. The smile of someone who had carried something alone for a long time and had just watched someone else finally pick up the other end of it. Good, she said. Thessaly looked at the file one last time. At 43 entries. At 11 years of insufficient numbers, trying to describe something that had never been a numbers problem. She closed it. Go home, Corporal, she said quietly. Someone's waiting.